of the uh, underlying key thoughts to have in mind as we think about propaganda and psychology, and that is the task of the propagandist. The propagandist is, regardless of what their agenda is, be it for a political agenda or whatever it might be, but their goal is to try to tap into to discern what are the thoughts that are already in the heads of the target audience. And there are various techniques that are used to be able to discern what are things that people already have established as a narrative about a particular topic. And it may be narratives that the individual is not cognizant of that it's existing. And that narrative equates to bias, equates to worldview. The words are interchangeable, okay? So for the propagandist, it is to identify what that is and to then take what is the message, what is the goal that I want to do to manipulate the people who have that thought in their head. And that is to take whatever that manipulation is that I want to accomplish, and to structure a message that taps into those ideas that are already existing. And I don't have to say much about it. All I have to do is use one word, and that word will translate into volumes inside of the heads of the audience that is my target. And so what I want to do is I want to tap into that narrative. I want to use words that'll open up that narrative, and then I want to squeeze in the message that I want to get across so that you will embrace whatever it is that I'm promoting at that particular time. And I would hope you would see it in some of the events that are going on today. Putin just uses the word Nazi. And that means a whole bunch to people in Eastern Europe and in Russia. So he doesn't have to elaborate on it, he just has to say the word. And so what we're doing is we're fighting Nazis. That then sets off that narrative so that for people who have received that message, it has a broader meaning than what has simply been stated by the communication. And you can look at it in many different contexts. But mind you, we're talking a lot about political stuff, and today we're in a flood of right-wing autocratic kinds of things. So the contemporary examples are going to be about right-wing sort of stuff. If we were in a different point in history, like let's say the 1960s, where we were more of a leftward kind of drift, the same thing would be going on then. So that, these are techniques that are used for either, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, everyone can use these techniques. They've been used for a long, long time, and they are very effective. And in structuring that message, you can involve, it can have some truth in it. I mean, for it to be effective, it can be half-truths, it can be eliminating context, it can be designed in a very deliberate and thoughtful fashion so that, again, that target audience really is not aware of what is going on, but in the end, you want them to subscribe to whatever it is you are promoting. If we look at the Supreme Court hearings, simply say critical race theory. That's all that matters. There are people who get very upset that, oh, that was a stupid title to give to that, academic legal theory that academicians would debate. It's not, mind you, there are people, and actually the critical race theory came about from a propagandist scanning things, looking for phrases that he knew would work, would resonate, would then trigger all kinds of things about racial animus that would trigger the population that they wanted to target. So again, it is, or defund the police. We can do a whole class about what defund the police actually means. Again, it's also an academic phrase, but just say it, and what it means is, oh, they want to get rid of the police, and it's so that they don't have to do this, that, and the other things with these minorities and all of that. So again, the propagandist looking for what's already there, words that can be said that will trigger the whole narrative. You don't have to say anything else. You can capture that energy and use it to your advantage in communicating something that may be directly against the interest of that audience. And so today we're going to talk about one of the key things, key narratives that can be in your head is going to be something that prompts fear, that frightens you to death. And then its natural offspring, which is hate. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I want you to hear some of the academics talking about studies they've done about fear, and then I'll turn it over to Terry. So let's see.
A lot of psychologists and researchers believe that fear is an innate emotion. It's believed that we are born with the ability to be afraid because it's a survival mechanism. If we did not have fear, we would not then get into a reaction to fear, which is something that is within us to survive, to be able to properly prepare ourselves for anything that's a danger.
I think fear is a survival mechanism, certainly. Fear has adaptive qualities for us over time. We needed to be afraid of things in order to survive. So the basic fears like fear of lightning, fear of fire, fear of heights, fear of danger, fear of the saber-toothed tiger, all of those were quite functional for us. And then over time, when there was not that need to be afraid of those things because we were living in more industrialized societies, we seemed to be afraid of other things, mainly other people.
Certainly, fear would be a very valuable biological mechanism because our ancestors would have lived perilous lives. They'd have been frightened of predators, lions, saber-tooths, no, probably not saber-tooths, and leopards. They would have had disease would have swooped without warning, without explanation. So they would naturally have tried to think of ways to avoid these terrible dangers. In the case of disease, which before modern science was completely unpredictable, unknowable, one would naturally fall into superstitious habits. These are superstitious responses, and when you're living in a world of ignorance.
So it's not surprising that people will go to incredible lengths to survive. If you think back to, caveman days, hearing noises, fear for your life, are you in danger of any kind, that there are fears that are actually just natural, innate, that are there to kick in the fight or flight response so that we are on guard. We're prepared for something that may be something we need to either avoid, something we need to get away from, escape from, in order to keep ourselves alive, keep ourselves safe. That type of an innate fear is going to be very different from fears that are learned.
Our survival fears, when you look at evolutionary psychology, what we needed to be afraid of in order to survive. And I can't say that that's had adaptive qualities, but a sociologist would probably say that it's been functional. It sounds a little bit odd to think that fear could be functional, but in actuality, if you look at in-groups and out-groups in society, the us versus them, it's actually quite functional to be afraid of them.
Certainly a lot of fears that it is believed are learned along the way or conditioned, depending on the school of psychology that you believe. But then there's also a lot of research to show that there are innate fears that we are born with that are there to protect us, that we need those natural reactions in order to be prepared, be on guard, and survive threats. Watson wanted to look at, could someone learn to be afraid of something? You had this young boy, this little boy, who had no fear of rats. He would sit with this white rat, he would pet him, he would play with him. There was no indication that there was any issue whatsoever. And Watson set out to create a situation where little Albert would grow to be afraid of the rat. So what he started to do was associated every time Albert went to reach for the rat, a very loud noise, so loud that it would make little Albert jump. And he kept, anytime little Albert went to touch the rat, let the rat sit in his lap, for example, any kind of contact whatsoever, little Albert would hear this loud noise. And it got to the point where little Albert became afraid to go anywhere near the rat, because at that point, the virtually automatic reaction that he had learned was associating the loud, scary sound with interacting with the rat.
The attitudes that children learn in the family, that starts as soon as they begin understanding their parents. And I mean, it's not just what they say, but children pick up on facial expressions. They pick up on energy before they can even communicate. So that emotional, they can be quite sensitive to just anxiety in the air at very young ages. If you grow up in a household that is unsafe, where you feel it's not stable, not constant, not consistent, you are definitely prone to see the world as a more fearful place. If there's a lot of volatility, it goes back to another theory, Erik Erikson's theory. It's a lifelong developmental theory, but the very first psychosocial crisis is trust versus mistrust. And he theorized that it happens in the first year of life, and if you don't gain the sense of trust in your world, when you're hungry, someone's going to be there. When you're crying, someone's going to comfort you. Then you'll resolve that on the continuum of mistrust. And what that means is that that's the lens through which you're going to view your world.
So there's certainly genetic or nature aspects where you can see patterns in family, personality traits that get passed along from family to family. If you are born into a family where you see, for example, your father beating your mother, a logical part of you knows that that's not okay. So even though you know it's not okay, this is what you have learned by observation. Getting back to behavioral psychology, this is what you've learned by observation is the way I deal with my anger. And the hard part for a lot of people is, when are you taught something else?
Then if you're governed by fear, you could very well make up superstitions. Pigeons do it in Skinner boxes. Skinner himself did a very interesting experiment in which he put pigeons in a Skinner box is a cage in which if the pigeon does something like peck a key, it gets a reward, and pigeons readily learn to do that.
I will try to pick out some particular pattern of behavior and make it a more frequent part of the repertoire of the bird. Right, fine. This bird has been already conditioned to eat when the magazine sounds and the light flashes.
When it came to Skinner's work, what Skinner wanted to look at was, could you use twofold, rewards and punishments? Whereas if you introduce something positive, like to a pigeon a food pellet, it would encourage the pigeon to keep pecking at the lever to get more food, and thus would continue pecking and continue pecking. So you could get a behavior to increase and continue.
It's not doing anything in particular, you see, but I'm going to try to get it to do something. Suppose I shape up the behavior of making a complete turn.
If he came back after a few hours and saw half a dozen pigeons under this regime, one pigeon would be preening under its left wing, another would be turning round in circles, another would be scratching the ground, another would be wiping its head on the ground. Each pigeon had superstitiously done something accidentally been rewarded because that's when the mechanism produced the food, and carried on doing it. And so each pigeon became a kind of maniac for doing a particular ritual, which is exactly like one tribe sacrifices a goat in order to make the rains come. Another tribe gets down on its knees and faces Mecca and prays 5 times a day, whatever it is. Each tribe develops its own superstition in order to get rewarded, and of course in order to avoid being punished, in order to avoid the fearful consequences of random events which they had no control over.
Because it's believed that for a lot of people, religion is something that people find comforting because, for example, a fear of death. Well, if there's this wonderful afterlife, I'm going to go to heaven and there's going to be all my family there, it's suddenly not so bad. So it's believed that for a lot of people, religion has become a societal way of coping with anxieties.
If you believe the way we do, then yes, you're going to come back as a more evolved being, you're going to go to heaven, you're going to have your own planet, you're going to have 40 virgins or something in your afterlife. But if you don't, then it's going to be eternal hell and damnation.
Okay, so that was to give you some of the research on fear. And let me say what, not to digress into the military, but it is important to understand military training is totally predicated upon the work of B.F. Skinner. It is primarily a psychology training exercise when you go into recruit training and advanced training. It is all about taking fear and teaching you that the response is not to flight, but to fight. And that's what happens. That's how we get programmed. Okay, Dr. Bordan, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a couple of things as I was watching it that came to mind. Skinner used to put his own baby in a box. He finally stopped doing it, but it's just incredible to think the lengths that some of these researchers would go. And I, for one, was very offended when the guy with the British accent, I think we all equate British accents with brilliance, called facing Mecca a superstition. So it's interesting to see how political correctness has evolved and how you have to really watch your step. And thirdly, that someone would put a rat with a baby, I found pretty obnoxious. But fear. You have to have fear before you hate. And fear is a very primitive emotion, but it's a survival tool. As one of the gals said, we know that something is dangerous and we want to avoid it or we want to fight it. It used to be the saber-toothed tiger, and we still have what goes on within our bodies, the same as when the cave people would see a saber-toothed tiger. And interestingly enough, we don't even know how to differentiate fear in terms of something great is about to happen and I hope it will happen, versus fear, I have to take a final, and if I flunk the final, I'm going to flunk the course. We have the same feeling that resides inside us. If you were waiting for a blind date and you're a teenage girl and the doorbell rings, what happens to you anatomically is the same thing that happens to you if you were to face a saber-toothed tiger. So it's interesting to see the evolution, but to understand that the evolution somehow has gone awry a little bit. But yes, it's a primitive emotion. It's a survival tool. It tells us be afraid and do something about it. And we need to do that. I'm just looking at some of the notes. There's certainly a biochemical part to it. Heart beats faster, sweaty palms, the adrenaline rush, all those things, as well as the emotional response that comes with it. And we fear what we can't control. And when we're told something is different or something is wrong at a young age, we do learn to fear it. And if you're raised with certain beliefs, then yeah, you're going to hold on to those beliefs. And we can see it in hate groups. I remember there was one time I was watching the Phil Donahue show, and he had members of the KKK on, and there was like a little boy that was wearing a white robe with the holes in the eyes, spouting the horrific, ugly, disgusting language of his father, perhaps even of his parents. So we do learn to hate, but first we have to fear. And interestingly, we know with brain studies that when we see something that's different from us, our brain reacts differently. So it's innate. And how can we fight being afraid of something that's different? Easy, by role modeling for a child that there are no differences in terms of religion or race, color of skin, or belief. Need to educate. And we also need to do some changing in our culture. But that's for another course and another day, because that would take many days to talk about how our culture influences fear and thus influences hate. And we're going to learn when we talk about defense mechanisms, and you probably already know it anyway, that sometimes we hate, we fear what's inside us. There's a self-loathing, or we feel inadequate. And in order to feel better, we project that onto other people. And the children, as early as the age of 5, understand what it means to see somebody that looks different from them. And they also understand that their parents or their subset of culture has already equated that with a dehumanizing concept about the other. So it is us versus them. And when you're a member of a group and you are insecure, when you lack decent self-esteem, in order to feel better, it is really it's a relief mechanism to project that onto somebody else and to fear them and thus eventually hate them. Sometimes we have fears that are very specific, like a phobia. That's a fear of something it's an extreme fear of something. And of course, it's not grounded in reality. It's grounded in our reality through some experience or through something that parents have taught us. Sometimes it's easy to pick it up. Sometimes it isn't. My mother was deathly afraid of lightning and thunder, and we would all be crowded into the bathroom to wait for the lightning and thunder to end. And I'm surprised that I haven't grown up fearing lightning and thunder. It's almost like I should have, but for some reason I did not. So sometimes it's easy to just acquire what the parents believe or think or behave, and other times it's not so easy. So what do you do, by the way, if you have a phobia? Because I think that's interesting. I always recommend that anybody in this class, anybody period, that is phobic about something, truly phobic, that's an extreme fear. It's not just a fear, it's an extreme fear. What can you do? My advice is always to go to a place that specializes in phobias. Many people go to just plain old therapists that have worked with people that are phobic. But the best kind of therapy would be to go to a place that specializes in it, because what they do is they have a couple of methods. Well, they have more than a couple, but the two main methods are systematic desensitization that's an awfully fancy way of saying we're going to get you used to what you're phobic about, and therefore you will no longer continue to be phobic. And what we will do is we will gradually build up so that you face the actual thing that you're phobic about, and you're able to face it because we've combined that with relaxation exercises, or how to feel relaxed, because you can't be relaxed and have an extreme fear or a phobia at the same time. So that's coupled. Another way that some therapists do that's really very dangerous, but actually very effective, it's called flooding, where you present a phobic object, like if you're afraid of spiders, like a glass tank filled with spiders. It's a flooding of it, and that really can only be done with an expert in the field. Because on occasion, sadly, I've heard some general therapists who do that with their clients, and it's really not good. We've also heard, one of the common phobias is fear of flying. And I don't know if they're still doing it, but there was a center in New York that specialized in it, and they built up to an actual flight, a short flight with the people. But again, that was through the systematic desensitization. So what can you do if you have a fear? Because I think the important thing not only is to talk about these topics, but to see how we can practically work to abate them, to change our way of thinking. Remember last week with criminal justice, slow down, you got to slow down. We have to slow down our thinking. We have to challenge ourselves when we are afraid of something. How did this begin? Why did it begin? Really a lot of self-talk and meditation, relaxation exercises. But the important thing is to challenge our thinking. I've heard from somebody in the class, a couple of people actually, and the day that Sal is not going to be with us, we'll start off by talking about Sal, because that'll give us an opportunity to do that. I'll give you some examples of how crazy he really can be, and I hope that you'll share that with me. And then we'll talk about defense mechanisms. And what I'll do, because a couple of people have said they're interested, is tell you a little bit more about cognitive brief therapy. So we talked for a minute about fear. And as I said, fear precedes hate. And they told you in the little vignette that Sal showed that fear can be innate. It can be useful. It's a survival tool, but it's innate. Also, it's a conditioned response as well, which we know. But hate is not innate. It's not natural. You have to be taught. You have to be taught to hate. So what can we do about hate? As I said, fear has got to precede hate. And as I said, sometimes you hate what's within yourself, but you're in denial. We'll talk all about that with the defense mechanisms lecture. But you're really, truly, truly in denial. And you want to feel better. The ego says, let me protect you. I know how I'll protect you. You don't have that thought. You aren't that way, but the other person is. So fear evolves to hate. Sadly, and we see it today so much, but it's always been there, dehumanization. When you hate another group, you take away their humanity. I went to a lecture once at the Aspen Institute in Colorado, and Madeleine Albright was there, Dianne Feinstein, the former envoy to the Middle East was there. And I remember Madeleine Albright saying, in order for there to be peace in the Middle East, people have got to regard Jews as human beings. And she said, right now, they don't. And that's just one example of it. Just thinking back to our own history, thinking somebody was 4/5 a person. What kind of nonsense is that? And kids as early on as 5 years old understand that there are differences and can be taught either directly or indirectly to dehumanize the different person. They're taught to hate. There's white privilege in this country that a lot of people deny and say, oh, come on, especially people that are economically disadvantaged who happen to be white, say there's no such thing as white privilege. Oh, indeed, as we know, there is. And it's so unfair because by virtue of your birth, it's unearned. You have this privilege. And there's been a lot of studies done that people of privilege behave differently from people that are not privileged. We take up more space. We voice our ideas more. And we continue to have this privilege via education, socialization, culture, and it's so terribly unearned. And to be a person of privilege is wonderful, but everybody should be a person of privilege. And sadly, we know globally that is not the case. We need a willingness to see ourselves as imperfect. That's one of the first steps, because again, fear evolves to hate. It's dehumanization. That's part of the fear and the hate. And as I said, sometimes it's what we don't understand and loathe within ourselves that we can't face. And what's the remedy? Education. Education, which hopefully someday will change the culture. And as I was reading about hate and fear and all that stuff, and thinking about music, I was so impressed with the lyrics to You Have to Be Taught, Oscar Hammerstein. And there is a line in the lyrics that says you have to be taught by 6, 7, or 8. And he's right, because I said that 5 years, it's like a magic age. 5 years, as the church has always said, give me somebody for the first 5 years and I don't care what you do with them after the first 5 years. But yeah, at the age of 5 or approximately 5, kids know this is a different looking person, and this different looking person is not as good as I am. Education, culture, there's also tons of other studies that support that we're not doing a great job in this country in terms of having people feel naturally equal to people who are different. It's just not there. Our culture promotes violence. We promote competition. We disenfranchise so many people. And the people that are disenfranchised, they gravitate to these hate groups. There are approximately 900 hate groups and counting in our country. And we can see sometimes from the members of these groups that they seem to be not the successful ones in this nation. We hear some of them speak, and then we realize that their education has either been stopped or is insufficient or inferior. But yet there's a camaraderie that these disenfranchised people have and share in these groups. And as we all know, when you're in a group, you'll do a lot of stuff that you wouldn't do as a single person. But I wanted to read you because I thought it was so interesting. Excuse me. Obviously, Oscar Hammerstein researched this because of that line about 6, 7, or 8. But here it is about hate, because remember, fear evolves to hate, and hate is not natural, not like fear. Fear is natural, hate is conditioned. And these were the lyrics. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught, excuse me, to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And sadly, there are many people in this country that are being educated very carefully on wrong things. I will return it back to Uncle Sal.
Okay, well, thanks. I want to, well, let me just see. I think I made, there we go. Let me get back to here. And I want to show some examples of using fear and with the text of hate in it. Give you some examples.
Welcome back, everyone. A migrant caravan heading from Central America to the U.S. border right now.
Hundreds of Honduran immigrants just crossed into Guatemala several hours ago, and they're planning to apply for humanitarian visas so they can pass through Mexico. And President Trump tweeted about it earlier. He warned that if the caravan is not stopped, money and aid to Honduras will be cut off. Here's Leila Santiago.
They've been traveling by foot for days. Among them, mothers carrying young children, men being pushed in wheelchairs. This group of about 3,000 Honduran migrants is headed to the United States in search of a better life, fleeing poverty and violence in their home country. They made the long trek through Honduras to the Guatemala border, then on to the city of Esquipulas, where the group clashed with Guatemalan police who blocked one of the border crossings. It's a long journey, but they say they do not have much of a choice.
There's much corruption here in Honduras. We want to work. There is none. We want land to plant bananas, plantains, beans. There isn't any, brother. We need to migrate to another country, brother. In the hospitals, there's no security. There's nothing. Our patients die, brother.
President Donald Trump threatened the Honduran government if the caravan continues on, he says, tweeting, "The United States has strongly informed the president of Honduras that if the large caravan of people heading to the United States is not stopped and brought back to Honduras, no more money or aid will be given to Honduras effective immediately." The Department of Homeland Security expanded on Trump's tweet, calling the caravan a, quote, result of well-advertised and well-known catch-and-release loopholes. Andrea Aleman, who's making the journey with her 4 children, believes she should be allowed into the U.S.
We're heading to the United States. We're going to arrive with Donald Trump. He has to receive us. Just as we receive the Americans over here, they will have to accept us over there.
One of the group's organizers says that the plan is to walk across Guatemala and reach Tapachula in southern Mexico. There, they hope to apply for humanitarian visas or get asylum. According to the U.S. State Department, Honduras has had one of the highest murder rates in the world since 2010. The World Bank reports that over 66% of the population lives in poverty. Leila Santiago.
And unless you think it's just right-wing stuff.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9, 10, 9.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
And so that's to highlight, hopefully you can see the themes that are underlying. I mean, I think some of them kind of explicit, but I think that it understand, again, that's the propaganda seeking to have a message that speaks to ideas that are already in people's minds, and to be able to craft their message within that context to elicit a response from the target audience. And again, as I mentioned, this isn't new. It's important to understand that at the time of the American Revolution, John Adams, Ben Franklin, what they do is they take they know that the colonists are not all joined together, that they're independent, that they see themselves as not part of the, a colonial America. They're part of Virginia. They're part of Massachusetts, part of New York. These are separate, independent entities. And so they don't think that they can galvanize them to be able to fight against the British. And so John Adams, Ben Franklin, they start writing articles for newspapers up to a year before the American Revolution. What are they arguing? They are making the case that England is trying to agitate the slaves to go and kill their masters and kill white people. They are suggesting that Native Americans are being encouraged by the British to attack nearby villages and kill women and children. There's only loose fact to be able to support what they're saying, but that's what they're doing. And those articles get reprinted in newspapers throughout the colonies. And from the author, the historian who wrote about this, I argue patriot leaders weaponized prejudice about African Americans and Indians to unite the American colonists and hammer home the idea that the British were treacherous and dangerous enemies. Immediately after Lexington and Concord, patriot leaders seized any story they could lay their hands on that hinted British agents might be using natives or enslaved people to put down the American rebellion. Franklin made up a hoax. This was most certainly what we would call fake news today. He created an entirely fictional newspaper issue called Supplement to the Boston Independent Chronicle, which featured letters documenting the grisly discovery of bags upon bags of American scalps. Boys, girls, women's, infants taken from the New York frontier, and how they were laid before George III with well wishes from a Seneca chief that the king may regard them and be refreshed. By the way, don't ask the Seneca for a reference for George Washington. He was their nemesis. As I mentioned, military stuff is predicated on, teaching that when you're frightened, you attack. And so there are several books on it that I think address it very well. Lieutenant Colonel Grossman wrote a book called On Killing: The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society. Christopher Hedges, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. And Jonathan Shea, Achilles in Vietnam, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. All three are really excellent on the topic of how, again, the psychological incubator can be used in a very effective way and is really at the heart of military training. Okay, so with that, Lauren, we can open up for questions, comments.
Could I say something before?
No, yes, of course you can.
Something I said a few weeks ago has bothered me. It's about trans citizens. I wanted to get the point across that someone who is a transsexual is the same as all of us. It's just somebody that was born into the wrong skin, to be really primitive about it. But I felt that I was unfair to people who are intersexed. That's not a birth defect. They are proud of who they are and their combination of genes or hormones or whatever it is that makes them different from us. And I just wanted to get that point across, because sometimes to say birth defect can be pejorative, and I meant it only in the most positive sense. So just wanted to clear that up, and back to whatever you want.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead, Lauren. Let's let everyone
okay.
call us names.
So people can, of course, use the raise the hand or put your questions or comments into the chat box. And again, I always just think there's so much information to digest. It takes a minute for everybody to kind of catch up here. If you are asking a question, you may want to turn your video back on so that we can read your lips as well as hear you. I see people are getting their
okay.
Their videos on, and so they're coming back.
While we're doing that, just I just want to reemphasize that as you look at contemporary events and just look for those individual words that are meant to trigger things, and it's not elaborated on. It's just say the words, and you'll get the response. That is a part of that whole propagandistic exercise. Okay, Linda.
Yeah, the thing about learning to hate before you're 6, 7, or 8, but people can learn later to hate, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Is it different, or is it? I mean,
it's kind of like psychiatric illness, a generalization, and that's all it is a generalization. The earlier it starts, the more solid the disorder may be and difficult to treat. And I would think that just as the church says, give me somebody for 5 years and then I don't care what happens after, I would think that that's almost DNA stuff when kids believe the filth that their parents spout.
Another thing is from something I learned, the hierarchy of, what was it, Maslow, I think it is
hierarchy
that
of needs.
you learn to trust in the first couple of years, and if you don't learn to trust, then that maybe you never learn it. Is that really true, you think?
Well, years ago, there was an uptick in adopting children from Eastern European countries. These children had been in orphanages for quite some time. And some of them really were quite ill when they were adopted by parents here or any other country. They couldn't bond. That not all of them, but I'm just talking about some of them. They lacked empathy. Yeah, you need that. You need that trust versus mistrust. You need to feel safe and secure in your environment. And many of these babies who were adopted out at 2 or 3 or however old they were, who spent their lives in cribs and not being attended to, were very, very difficult. And I felt so sorry for the parents because many of the parents gave them back, and people said, you can't give a baby back. A baby isn't a dog or a cat. A baby is a baby. You adopted this baby, it's yours. But they said, you have no idea what we are going through, and we can't spend another day with this child. So no, it's not. As a matter of fact, there was a documentary, I'll make it fast, on HBO, Child of Rage. This girl was an animal. She wanted to kill her brother. She wanted to kill the parents. She was adopted out of a very dysfunctional home, a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of all kinds of abuse. She was adopted out about 3. The brother was still a toddler. He was okay, but she was an animal. And the documentary ended by the parents sending her to this ranch that dealt with children that are almost sociopathic, and probably are. And many, many years later, I was fortunate enough when I was channel surfing that there was this woman on, she was about 20, and it was the Child of Rage. She was the one that was sent to the ranch. She was adopted by the woman that owned the ranch. And then they asked her adoptive mother, why did you adopt her? She was like an animal. And the woman said she told one story once, and I saw a little tear fall out of her eyes, and I knew she was salvageable. So yeah, it's tough. Yeah, bonding.
Well, all I can say is that we see a lot of this stuff today in these political commercials, what have you. Eileen, you have a question?
No, just a comment. I think that these poor children in Ukraine that are being born there, all those infants, what on earth is their life going to be like? It starts so terribly. And I see that they are trying to love them. 4 people and 40 children isn't going to do much, is it? This is a tragedy over there. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And the studies now are showing us that future generations of those kids are going to be affected by what those kids were, those babies, those kids were affected by. It changes your DNA. It's really very interesting, some of the brain studies that they're doing now.
Jessica?
You know, Sal, one thing that was perfect for me when you talked about propaganda, that underlying propaganda, there needs to be some amount of truth or connection in a person's mind for it to really work effectively. I thought, that's just like or similar to back in like pagan days when colonizers built or missionaries or whatever, built churches on the site of the pagans' worship place to give some base to what they were trying to be sold by the new outfit. It's a kind of a stretch.
Yeah, no, I understand. And my friend Nina sent me an article just before class, which talks about constructing the propagandistic message with truth, half truth, leaving out context, that kind of thing. And I'll forward it to the class if you find it interesting. But yeah, it is. It's the stuff that makes me go crazy. It's like we all know about what happened on September 11th, but we leave out what happened when we sabotaged the Afghan government in 1979. We all know about what happened at Pearl Harbor, but we conveniently leave out what Commodore Perry did in 1853. I mean, you can come to whatever judgment you want, but you need to have the story,
right,
so that you can make that judgment. Well, when people are leaving out substantial information, they're doing it for a reason.
Oh, sure.
And so it's part of that propagandistic. It's to understand that the manipulator, the propagandist, is when they craft their message, it's very skillfully done. And it's not based on truth. It's based on partial truth, drips of truth, and so look, that's and it's important for people to be as cognizant of what's going on as possible, so that when they hear that message, they, before reacting to it, which is what they do, you start to say, wait a minute, what are they up to? I don't even care if I'm watching a commercial, selling a heat remedy for your back. What are they doing? Or an insurance company who's going to say, oh, we care about the family. We're a member of this community, and it's all. And mind you, if you went into their board of directors meeting and you said, let's talk about the family, they would throw you out of there. So it's all that manipulation that goes on is what we need to be cognizant of. Let's get Linda and Kay. We'll come back to you. I saw your hand up there, Kay. We'll go ahead, Linda, and then we'll come to Kay.
No, I was just going to say that last night I heard about there's a group that they were kind of behind the attack on Justice Jackson. Okay. And they're going after every judge that he's going to put forth. And they're going to come up with something like a little teeny bit thing. And then they're going to, she's a pedophile, or implying that she's a pedophile. But there's a group, this reporter identified a group that's their task.
Yeah, that's Jane Mayer has an article this month in the New Yorker magazine, which is a very important article. I think Jane Mayer is an extraordinary reporter, but she's highlighting how these very powerful right-wing groups are using very sophisticated techniques. They want to see America collapse. They have, this is their agenda. Their ideas are captured in Democracy in Chains. The idea, if you think of democracy in chains, it's not democracy. It means that I want to get rid of democracy. I want to lock it up. I want to kill it. I want to get rid of it. Those are very powerful people, and it's important for you to become cognizant of what they're doing. Go ahead, Kay.
Well, some of the laws that are being passed that were kind of getting started, kind of going backward on the LGBTQ community. Don't say gay, just kind of a start. So I feel like that's mild hate that I have. Is that born of fear? Or it doesn't feel like it to me, but as
well, one of the things we had, we're talking about wanting to do some hypotheticals as part of the class, and look, if I have someone who your world is normal, however normal has been defined. You have the normal, luxury car. You have the normal 3,000 square foot house. You got the normal kids who are getting A's after they've been helped by tutors. You have a normal life. Anything that's outside are the them. Us are the people who live in our community and our neighborhood. Now, when it comes to things about, mind you, the homosexual community or people, LGBTQ, whatever, this is not 30% of the US population. This is a small percentage of that population. So it's very easy to label them as them, not one of us. So I have a minority that I can attack so that all of the us's will come to my, it's easy to hate, to start to generate fear of them and get hate of them for my political advantage. Even though I might if I'm the propagandist or the political person or whoever's gaining an advantage by doing it, I may not think there's anything wrong with those people. But I'm going to use it anyway because I have a political advantage to it.
There's not a lot, it depends. There's latent homosexuality in just about everybody. So again, we're talking about fear evolving into hate. So if someone is different from you and there's a part of you that may be very unconscious that has this latency brewing within you, yeah, that's why it can, grow to hate. Males, there have been studies, males are more okay with lesbian relationships than they are with male relationships. And it's attributed to the fact that males may have more homosexuality in terms of latency within them. So yes, it gets easy to fear. And then I'll put in a plug because it's very important. I am so proud to have a friend, Ruth Berman, and there is a bill in Congress, the Ruthie and Connie Elder Care LGBT bill. And if anybody who's listening now is interested in something like that, please write your representative and tell them that that bill must pass. And I'm just so proud that she's my friend and Connie was my friend too, but Connie passed a couple of years ago.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I just want to comment as far as fear. The way I view this, as far as the people who are afraid of people coming over in caravans across the border and so forth, I think what they're afraid of is that they have seen all these numbers drop, lily white numbers, that were that the United States had like 85% or something WASPy people back in say 1955. Okay, now all of a sudden they're looking at these numbers and it's skyrocketed as far as other nationalities and colors and so forth. And the white population has shrunk down to something that has driven them into a fear state that maybe there won't be but 10 more of them left in another 10 years or something, some type of fear like that. And I'm not sure that they want to shut down the United States as much as that they want to get some place in the United States where they can all go and then grow it into a bigger thing. Like, for example, somebody has mentioned before Idaho. I don't know if it was in this class or another class, where they said there were a lot of such people living in places like Idaho, Montana, and so forth. Now, personally, I can't see the governor of Florida moving to some place cold like Idaho, But I'm just saying, when I'm talking about Terry's concept on fear here, and I think that's absolutely correct. I think what they're afraid of is their numbers have shrunk so dramatically that when they hear things like caravan is coming, they just get into a wild frenzy of fear.
Can I add my own point there is that sometimes even if they don't mean to, the media is co-conspirators in this. I just saw a report yesterday about how Governor Abbott is taking people that are coming across the border and shipping them up to Washington, D.C. And they gave his point of view. They gave the ranchers' point of view. They gave some the point of view of some residents in Washington, D.C. But largely, I'm not going to say 100%, but largely the perspective of the people who were actually coming across the border was completely overlooked. So even though the reporter themselves didn't mean to create that kind of bias, it was by the way it was being reported, and like you said, Sal, omitting certain pieces of information.
Well, I think one of the things that it's important to understand is that when you listen to a news report, it is really centered on the event that day, and all of the background, all of the context is outside the parameter of what you're going to get in that report. And people say, yeah, but we got 24-hour news now. No, you have 24 hours of 1 hour of news. That same hour gets repeated 24 times. So they're not giving you an expansive understanding or context of the event or what's behind it. They're giving you and that's not to be, to denigrate. It is simply to recognize that you're only getting a small piece of the information
of news
that you need to have to understand. Yeah. Okay, I think we are out of time. By the way, I'll be here next week with Terry, and then the last 2 weeks you'll have Terry alone, so I won't be able to take away from her scintillating presentations. It'll all be her.
So you're not going to be here for the last 2 classes,
right? And she has agreed to take that Hammerstein song that she read the lyrics to, and she's agreed to sing that on the last day.
We can't wait for the lip syncing. It'll be awesome.
I sang it to Sal before the
yes, and I want to share that experience with everyone else too.
Oh, how thoughtful of you.
Yeah.
Dog.
I predict that Sal will be back for the last class. He's not going to help himself. That's my prediction.
Can't keep him away that long.
Okay, well, we'll see y'all next week. Thank you.